Don't you dare play innocent with me. What's that in your hand? You think I don't see what you're trying to slip into your pocket? I've been standing behind this counter long enough to spot a thief the moment he walks in, and you fit the description perfectly. Go on, show me what you're hiding before I call security. You really thought you could just stroll into an upscale boutique like this and walk away with a piece that costs more than your allowance for the year? Not in my store, not while I'm watching. Isaiah Benton, a 10-year-old boy with a soft-spoken nature and a quiet grace beyond his years, froze mid-step. The bracelet he held gleamed in his small hands, rose gold links reflecting the bright boutique lights. He blinked up at the woman scolding him, unsure what to say, the weight of her words sinking heavier with each breath. "Ma'am," he began gently, "I wasn't." "Don't talk back," snapped Marjorie Keene, a 56-year-old woman who had turned suspicion into habit. Her tone was sharp and certain, her authority self-assured. "You kids are all the same. You come in here pretending to browse, waiting for someone to look away so you can pocket whatever catches your eye. I've seen it too many times." Isaiah's voice was soft, careful. "I just wanted to look at it. It's for my aunt's birthday." Marjorie crossed her arms, her laugh brittle. "Your aunt's birthday? And you expect me to believe that? What's next? You're buying her a yacht too?" Her eyes swept over him with open disbelief. "Let's not play games. You can't afford this." Isaiah didn't flinch. He placed the bracelet back on the counter, each movement deliberate, respectful. "She makes jewelry," he said, quieter now. "I thought she'd like this one." Marjorie smirked. "She makes jewelry. How adorable. I suppose your aunt's a designer now, huh?" She turned toward the cashier behind her. "Arturo, keep an eye on him. He's been hovering near that case since he walked in." Arturo Jimenez, a 34-year-old man whose quiet demeanor often kept him out of conflict, looked up from polishing a watch. "Mrs. Keene," he said softly, "he's just a kid. Maybe he's telling the truth." Her voice snapped like a whip. "Do your job, Arturo. I didn't ask for your opinion." Isaiah stayed still, his calmness unsettling her more than any argument could. "I didn't mean to cause trouble," he said. "I just wanted to see something nice for her." "Oh, sure," she said, rolling her eyes. "You people always have a story, don't you? Always some excuse." The words hung there, poisonous and heavy. A few customers nearby stopped browsing. Some whispered, others pretended not to see, but everyone could feel the sting of her tone. Isaiah glanced around, realizing everyone was watching, but no one was helping. He took a quiet breath. "My aunt's the reason I came in. I wanted to get her something special." Marjorie folded her arms tighter. "You can save that for security," she said. "Maybe they'll believe your little story." She pulled her phone from her pocket and began to dial. Arturo's hands tightened around the cloth he was holding. "Mrs. Keene," he said again, this time with more force, "please, just stop for a second." "I told you to stay out of this," she snapped. "If you value your job, you'll keep quiet." Isaiah looked down at his shoes, his small voice breaking the silence. "It's for my aunt, Liana Benton." The name caught Arturo's attention. "Liana Benton?" he repeated, his brows lifting. Marjorie scoffed. "Oh, stop. Do you think throwing around some fancy name is going to change anything? Whoever she is, she's not walking in here." But then a calm voice answered from behind her. "Actually, I already have." Marjorie turned, startled. The woman who had just entered the boutique moved with quiet composure, every step confident, every glance precise. Liana Benton, a 39-year-old woman whose elegance carried its own gravity, stood framed in the doorway, dressed in a crimson dress that commanded respect without effort. "Aunt Liana," Isaiah said, relief flickering in his voice. The room shifted. The murmurs stopped. Even Marjorie's mouth fell slightly open. "Aunt?" she repeated, voice smaller now. Liana's gaze swept over the scene before her, first landing on her nephew, then on Marjorie. "Would you like to explain," she said evenly, "why my 10-year-old nephew looks like he's being interrogated?" Marjorie stammered, her words tumbling over each other. I was just doing my job. The boy was holding expensive merchandise and I thought." "You thought he was stealing," Liana said, her tone calm but laced with steel. I didn't say that, Marjorie replied quickly. But he looked suspicious. Liana tilted her head. Suspicious? How so? Marjorie hesitated. Well, he was standing near the display for too long and he's a child, Liana finished for her. A child looking for a gift. Marjorie's lips parted, but no sound came out. The quiet confidence in Liana's tone left no room for defense. Arturo spoke softly from behind the counter. Mrs. Keene, he said, that bracelet he was holding, it's part of the Benton collection. The color drained from Marjorie's face. What? Liana nodded. My collection. She looked at her nephew, then back at Marjorie. He recognized my work. He wanted to buy something that reminded him of me. And you treated him like a thief. The silence that followed was heavy enough to make the air itself feel still. Every eye in the boutique was on them now. Marjorie's throat tightened. I didn't know who he was. If I'd realized. Liana cut her off. You didn't need to know. You just needed to show him respect. Her words landed like quiet thunder. They didn't need to shout to be powerful. Marjorie tried to regain composure, fumbling for words. Please, Miss Benton, I meant no harm. You meant no harm, Liana repeated softly. And yet you humiliated a child for existing in a space you decided he didn't belong in. A woman near the back of the boutique whispered to her friend, That's her, she's the designer. Another nodded in disbelief, their earlier silence now heavy with guilt. Liana's eyes lingered on Marjorie's trembling hands, then softened toward Arturo. Thank you for speaking up, she said to him quietly. He shook his head. I didn't do enough. You did something, she said. That matters. Then she looked back at Marjorie. I don't believe in shouting matches, she said. But I do believe in consequences. If your first instinct when you see a child like my nephew is suspicion, then you have no business representing a brand built on artistry, class, and inclusion. Her words were calm, but they carried the weight of finality. Marjorie's eyes widened, realizing what was coming. Please, Miss Benton, Liana didn't let her finish. You're relieved of your position effective immediately. I'll make sure corporate is notified before the showcase tonight. Gasps echoed through the boutique. Arturo's eyes widened slightly, a mix of shock and relief washing over him. Marjorie's lips trembled. You can't do that. Liana's tone was final. I can't. And I just did. Isaiah stepped forward, his voice soft but firm. Aunt Liana, can we still go to the showcase? Liana smiled faintly, the tension easing from her face. Of course, sweetheart. As they turned to leave, the silence behind them was deafening. Arturo looked after them, then toward Marjorie, who stood pale and wordless. Sometimes justice doesn't need to shout, it just needs to stand tall. Moments like these make people wonder, what would you have done if you were standing there? Would you have spoken up or looked away? Think about it and never forget, respect isn't earned by status, it's deserved by humanity. Liana and Isaiah walked out of the boutique, the air behind them heavy with the silence they left behind. Isaiah kept close to his aunt's side, his small hands clasped in front of him. He didn't look back. There was no need to. Some things deserved to be left behind exactly where they happened. Liana Benton, a 39-year-old woman whose calm strength drew more attention than any display case of jewels ever could, didn't speak at first. She allowed the quiet to linger between them. She knew her nephew didn't need comfort. He needed understanding. I didn't want to make trouble, Isaiah said softly, his eyes fixed on the patterned carpet beneath their feet. I just wanted to find something you'd like. Liana's expression softened. You didn't make trouble, Isaiah. Someone else did. And they did it because they forgot what respect looks like. He looked up at her. Was she mean because I'm a kid? Liana hesitated, then answered with quiet honesty. No. She was mean because she judged you before she knew you. And that says everything about her and nothing about you. They reached the elevator that led to the upper deck, where preparations for the jewelry showcase were already underway. The soft hum of music drifted faintly from above, but neither of them spoke again until the doors closed behind them. When the elevator opened, the atmosphere changed. The deck had been transformed into a small exhibition hall, elegant and glowing with golden light. Display cases stood in neat rows, each holding pieces from Liana's new line, the same collection that had just caused so much pain downstairs. Crew members hurried about, adjusting lights, polishing glass, and checking placements. As they entered, the event coordinator rushed over. "Miss Benton. Everything's ready for the presentation," she said with a bright smile. "Guests will start arriving in about 20 minutes. "Thank you," Liana replied, her voice measured. "I'll speak to them first." Isaiah looked around in quiet awe, recognizing several pieces he'd seen in sketches on her work table back home. "Aunt Liana," he whispered, "everyone's going to see your work." She smiled gently. "That's the plan." Then after a pause she added, "And they'll see something more than that tonight." Downstairs, the tension still lingered in the boutique. Marjorie Keene sat behind the counter, pale and motionless. Arturo stood nearby, watching her with quiet unease. The store, once her kingdom of control, now felt foreign. Her authority had dissolved into the air like smoke. "You should go up," Arturo said quietly. "They'll be showcasing her collection soon." Marjorie looked up sharply. "You think I'd show my face after that?" He sighed. "I think maybe you should see what humility looks like." She opened her mouth to argue but stopped when she saw something in his expression. Not pity, not anger, but quiet disappointment. It was the same look Isaiah had given her before he left. That silent kind of judgment that didn't need words. Moments later, Arturo wiped his hands, straightened his tie, and left the boutique. He had made up his mind. Up on the deck, guests began to arrive, dressed elegantly for the evening's unveiling. Liana moved with poise among them, greeting faces familiar and new, her confidence effortless. Isaiah stayed close, holding her hand when the crowd pressed in too tight. Marjorie appeared at the back of the room just as the lights dimmed. She lingered near the door, unsure whether to step closer or slip away unnoticed. But something in her chest made her stay, some mixture of guilt, pride, and fear. The announcer stepped forward. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "tonight, we celebrate the brilliance of artistry and the vision of our featured designer, Ms. Liana Benton. Her new collection, Eternal Grace, is inspired by the strength that lives in quiet resilience." Polite applause rippled through the crowd. Liana took the stage, the soft glow of the spotlight wrapping around her as if it recognized her power. She smiled gently, not the kind of smile meant to charm, but one that told truth. "Thank you," she began. "I design jewelry to tell stories. Not the stories people want to hear, but the ones that live beneath the surface. Stories about dignity, pride, and the way light can still find you, even when someone tries to shadow your worth." Her gaze swept across the room, pausing near the back where Marjorie stood frozen. "Tonight's collection," she continued, "was inspired by the belief that beauty has no boundaries. It belongs to everyone who carries grace, even when the world refuses to see it." Isaiah stood beside the stage, his small frame upright, his chin slightly lifted. The guest's eyes followed the motion when Liana reached for him. "This," she said softly, "is my nephew Isaiah. He reminds me every day why I do what I do." A murmur of admiration swept through the audience. Cameras flashed. Isaiah blinked under the light but stayed calm, his quiet strength radiating more than any spotlight could. Somewhere near the back, Marjorie's throat tightened. She felt small, not because she had been scolded, but because the truth stood on that stage, shining in the form of a child she had tried to humiliate. Arturo stood beside her, glancing sideways. "Now do you see?" he whispered. "You were guarding what she made while disrespecting who made it." Marjorie said nothing. Liana continued speaking, her tone deepening. "Before we celebrate this collection," she said, "I want to share something that happened earlier today. My nephew walked into a boutique, this very ship's boutique, and was accused of stealing one of these pieces." The air in the room shifted. Gasps echoed. Heads turned. Liana's gaze didn't falter. He was humiliated for the simple reason that he didn't look like someone who belonged in that space. But let me tell you something. He belongs everywhere his integrity takes him. She let the silence that followed do the rest. It was heavier than applause, louder than outrage. Then her voice softened. To anyone who has ever been misjudged, dismissed, or underestimated, may you never forget your worth. May you stand taller every time someone tries to make you smaller. Because that's what grace truly is, unbreakable dignity. Applause erupted, this time not polite but heartfelt, fierce and long. Some stood. Some wiped their eyes. Even Marjorie, who had spent decades perfecting her posture of pride, felt her chest tighten. Isaiah looked up at his aunt, eyes shining. She smiled down at him, resting a hand on his shoulder. "That's for you," she whispered. The applause still thundered. Marjorie turned to leave quietly, but Arturo stopped her. "Stay," he said gently. "You need to hear it to the end." Moments like this make people reflect on what justice looks like in real life. Not loud, not cruel, but precise, graceful, and undeniable. Sometimes the most powerful response to prejudice is success spoken through calm truth. And sometimes the most lasting lesson is the one that leaves no room for excuses. The applause began to fade, but the emotion it carried stayed thick in the air. Liana stepped down from the stage, her composure still perfect, though her heart was heavy from what had unfolded earlier that day. She wasn't proud of what had happened, but she was proud of how it ended. She knew that sometimes strength meant refusing to shrink when someone else tried to make you small. Isaiah stayed close beside her, holding her hand. He didn't understand every layer of what had happened, but he understood the feeling of it, the sting, the silence, and the quiet justice that followed. Guests began to gather around them, praising her collection, complimenting her speech, congratulating her for the emotion she brought to her craft. Many spoke about the beauty of the jewelry, others spoke about the truth of her words. But for Isaiah, the evening wasn't about applause or attention. It was about understanding what dignity looked like in real life. Arturo stood at the back of the crowd, watching with a mixture of admiration and guilt. He'd worked under Marjorie Keene for 5 years, always keeping his head down, always swallowing the discomfort of seeing things he knew weren't right. But tonight something had changed. Liana's words had touched something inside him, something that made silence feel heavier than fear. When the showcase ended, people began to mingle, taking photos beside the glass displays. Marjorie was still standing at the edge of the room, uncertain whether to leave or approach. Her once commanding presence was gone, replaced by the quiet unease of someone standing in a room where her authority no longer meant anything. Liana noticed her. Their eyes met across the space. Marjorie froze. Liana turned to Isaiah. "Stay with Mr. Jimenez for a moment, all right? I'll be right back." He nodded. Arturo crouched slightly, offering a kind smile. "You did good today," he told the boy. "You kept your head up. That's not easy." Isaiah smiled faintly. "Aunt Liana says calm people are powerful." Arturo chuckled softly. "She's right." Across the room, Liana walked toward Marjorie. Her stride was steady, every step deliberate, every motion dignified. When she reached her, she stopped just close enough to be heard. "You stayed," Liana said. Marjorie nodded slowly, her voice small. "I didn't want to. But I needed to." Liana studied her for a moment. "That's something at least." "I don't expect forgiveness," Marjorie murmured. I don't know what to say." "You don't need to say much," Liana replied. "Just listen." Marjorie nodded again, her eyes wet. "I've spent my life walking into rooms where people see me before they hear me," Liana said quietly. "They look at my skin, my clothes, my confidence, and they decide what kind of person I must be. Sometimes they assume I'm staff. Sometimes they assume I don't belong. But today you made that mistake with a child." Marjorie's lip trembled. "I was wrong." "You were," Liana agreed. "But being wrong isn't the end of the story, it's what you do next that matters." Marjorie hesitated. "You fired me." "I did," Liana said plainly. "Because accountability is part of growth. But I didn't fire you to punish you. I did it to wake you up. You've been in positions of authority for too long to keep leading with bias. Maybe losing this will teach you what you refused to see before." Marjorie looked down, her pride crumbling with each word. "I don't know how to make this right." "You can start," Liana said, "by never letting your fear decide who someone is again. Silence hung between them, but it wasn't hostile. It was heavy, honest, and filled with something close to truth. After a moment, Marjorie spoke again. Your nephew, he didn't say anything cruel. He just stood there. He doesn't need to, Liana replied softly. Grace doesn't shout. It stands still and lets the truth do the talking. Marjorie nodded slowly, understanding more than she could express. Across the room, Isaiah was talking quietly with Arturo. The cashier had crouched down to his level, showing him how to polish a ring without leaving a fingerprint. It was a simple gesture, but it spoke volumes about respect, a small act to counter the earlier injustice. Isaiah smiled shyly. Can I try? Arturo nodded, handing him the cloth. Sure, but careful. It's easier to leave a mark than to remove one. Isaiah looked up with quiet wisdom. Kind of like people. Arturo blinked, then smiled. Yeah, kind of like people. From a few steps away, Liana overheard the exchange and smiled faintly. You're teaching him good lessons, Arturo? Arturo straightened, slightly embarrassed. He's teaching me too. Guests began to drift out as the evening drew to a close. The soft music that had filled the deck now played faintly, like the echo of something once loud now settling into peace. Marjorie lingered by the exit, unsure if she should say goodbye or simply slip away unnoticed. Before she could decide, Liana approached again, holding a small envelope. Take this, she said. Marjorie frowned. What is it? An invitation, Liana said. There's a community art program I fund back home. We teach kids from underrepresented backgrounds how to design and create. If you're willing to learn what real inclusion looks like, come by. Volunteer. Marjorie hesitated, her throat tight. You'd really want me there? I don't need to want you there, Liana said. But maybe you need to be there. Marjorie looked down at the envelope, then back up at her. For the first time, she didn't see an opponent. She saw someone she had misjudged, and someone she wanted to understand. Liana turned to leave, reaching for Isaiah's hand. He looked up at her. Are you okay, Aunt Liana? She smiled softly. I am now. As they walked away, Isaiah glanced back once at the boutique manager who had shouted at him hours earlier. He didn't see her as the same woman anymore. He saw someone learning the hard way that humility could be a beginning. Arturo followed them out, calling softly, Miss Benton, thank you again. She turned and smiled. No, Arturo. Thank you. Keep standing up even when your voice shakes. That's how change starts. As they disappeared down the hallway, the sounds of the ship hummed around them, quiet, steady, peaceful. Liana looked down at Isaiah and squeezed his hand. What happened today, she said, wasn't fair. But it was real. And real moments like that remind people who they are. Isaiah nodded thoughtfully. Do you think she'll change? Liana's voice softened. I think she already has to. Justice doesn't always happen in courtrooms or headlines. Sometimes, it unfolds in quiet rooms where truth meets pride, and wins. Sometimes, it happens when one person decides not to let the next moment repeat the last mistake. And sometimes, it's as simple as a boy who refused to lose his calm, and a woman who refused to lose her dignity. If you believe calm strength speaks louder than hate, share your thoughts in the comments. Like this story if you know respect is everyone's right, and subscribe if you believe dignity and equality should never be up for debate. The next morning arrived quietly, the ocean stretching endlessly outside the ship's windows. The events of the previous day lingered in the air, like the soft echo of a storm that had already passed but left the sky changed. Isaiah woke early. He dressed neatly as he always did when traveling with his aunt, and stood by the balcony door watching the light move across the waves. His reflection in the glass was small, but his posture was straight. He was still thinking about the woman from the boutique, how angry she had looked, and how different she had seemed by the end of the night. Liana joined him, her robe tied loosely around her waist, a cup of tea in her hand. She was a 39-year-old woman with quiet wisdom in her movements, someone who carried success not as pride but as presence. Couldn't sleep? She asked. Isaiah shook his head. I was thinking about her. Marjorie? He nodded. You think she really meant it? When she said she wanted to learn? Liana took a slow sip before answering. I think shame wakes people up faster than kindness does. But what they do after that, that's what matters. She smiled faintly. Why do you ask? Isaiah shrugged. Because I kind of feel bad for her. Her eyes softened. That's why you'll always have more power than people like her. You don't need to hate to win. The knock at their cabin door interrupted the quiet. Liana set down her tea and opened it to find Arturo standing there, still in his work uniform, holding a small box wrapped in blue tissue paper. Ms. Benton, he said politely, I hope I'm not disturbing you. I just wanted to give Isaiah this. Isaiah blinked, surprised. For me? Arturo nodded. It's from the boutique. I found it in the return section this morning and thought it should go to its rightful person. He handed the box over. It's the bracelet you were holding. Liana looked at him carefully. You didn't have to do that. Arturo smiled faintly. I know. But I wanted to. I put in my notice last night. I realized working under fear isn't the same as working with respect. Liana studied him for a moment, then nodded approvingly. You'll be fine, Arturo. People who make choices based on integrity always find better doors. He smiled softly. That means a lot, ma'am. Isaiah unwrapped the bracelet carefully, his eyes wide as the gold shimmered in his hands. It's beautiful, he whispered. Can I still give it to you? Liana's smile was warm. No, sweetheart. That one's yours now. A reminder that even when people doubt you, your intentions stay pure. A moment of silence passed, filled only by the soft sound of the ocean below. Later that day, a small letter arrived for Liana, hand-delivered by a crew member. The handwriting was familiar. She opened it and read the simple words written inside. Asterisk, thank you for the chance to make things right. I'll be there when I return home. Marjorie. Asterisk. Liana folded the paper gently, not with satisfaction, but with peace. Change didn't happen overnight, but it had started. That evening, Isaiah joined her for dinner at the ship's dining hall. The staff greeted them warmly, many recognizing her from the showcase. Some complimented Isaiah for how brave he had been. Each kind word built something in him, a quiet strength that would last far beyond this trip. As they ate, Liana noticed him watching the room. He was observing people. The way they smiled, the way they moved, how easily kindness could exist if someone simply chose it. He looked up at her suddenly. Aunt Liana? Yes, love? He tilted his head. Do you think the people who didn't say anything yesterday feel bad today? She thought about that. Some do, she said finally. And some probably don't. But silence never forgets. It stays with you until you decide to break it. He nodded slowly, understanding more than his age should allow. That night, as they walked the deck together under the stars, Isaiah held her hand tightly. I think I want to design something one day, he said. Something that reminds people to look at what's inside first. Liana smiled. Then you already know what kind of artist you'll be. They stopped at the railing, looking out over the dark horizon. The sea was calm now, the waves moving softly like a heartbeat. It felt like the world itself was breathing again. Back inside the boutique, a quiet transformation had begun. Marjorie Keene was clearing out her desk. Every jewelry display she polished now felt heavier with meaning. She'd written her letter to Liana before the store even opened that morning, but it was what she'd done afterward that mattered most. When a young black girl came in later that day with her mother, Marjorie caught herself watching. The girl pointed at a necklace, eyes shining, and Marjorie's instinct to shadow her flickered, just for a second. But this time she stopped herself. She approached with a soft smile and said, That one's lovely. Would you like to try it on? The mother blinked, surprised. Really? Of course, Marjorie said gently, her tone stripped of judgment. Everyone deserves to feel welcome here. The girl's smile was small but bright. It was the first step. Later that night, she sat alone in the empty boutique, looking at the jewelry around her. The silence wasn't guilt anymore, it was reflection. She didn't know if she'd ever see Liana or Isaiah again, but she knew one thing. She would never look at another customer the same way. Sometimes growth doesn't announce itself. It just begins quietly in the places where prejudice used to live. Moments like these remind us that real change isn't about speeches or punishment. It's about awareness, humility, and the courage to do better next time. If you believe the world needs more of that courage, comment below. Like this story if you believe respect should be unconditional, and subscribe if you stand for equality in every room for every person, every day. Days passed and the cruise neared its end. The air aboard the ship had changed. Faces seemed lighter, conversations warmer. But for Liana and Isaiah, the experience had left something deeper, a quiet lesson neither would forget. Isaiah, a 10-year-old boy who carried thoughtfulness like a second skin, had stopped asking questions about the incident. He seemed at peace now, though he often paused to observe people, watching how they treated others, how quickly some smiled, how others avoided eye contact when kindness was called for. Liana noticed this, though she didn't interrupt his silence. She knew her nephew was the kind of child who learned more from reflection than from instruction. That afternoon she took him to the upper deck cafe overlooking the sea. The sunlight shimmered across the waves like thousands of tiny mirrors. "Do you know what I'm proud of?" she asked. Isaiah looked up, eyes curious. "That I didn't cry?" She smiled gently. "No. That you didn't let someone else's behavior change who you are." He thought about that for a moment. "You mean I didn't get mad?" "Yes," she said. "Anger is easy. Dignity takes effort. You stayed calm even when you had every reason not to." He nodded slowly, understanding. "You weren't angry either." "Oh, I was," she said, smiling faintly. "But I've learned something in my years of walking into rooms that weren't built for me. The loudest voice doesn't always win. Sometimes it's the calmest one that changes everything." They sat quietly for a while, the sound of the waves filling the pauses between their words. Later that evening there was a farewell dinner for all guests. The same crowd that had watched the showcase gathered again, dressed elegantly, their laughter echoing through the grand dining hall. Liana's collection had been the talk of the voyage, but she had remained humble, greeting each compliment with genuine gratitude. As the evening went on, a small moment unfolded that caught Isaiah's attention. Arturo had been invited as an honored guest, something arranged quietly by Liana after learning he had resigned. He walked in looking unsure at first, but when Liana stood to greet him, applause broke out from those who recognized him. He smiled nervously, shaking her hand. "You didn't have to do this, Miss Benton." "I did," she said simply. "Because you chose courage over comfort." They sat together for dinner and Isaiah leaned in to whisper, "He looks happier." "He is," Liana whispered back. "Sometimes doing what's right sets your spirit free." Halfway through the meal, one of the ship's managers approached their table, a tall man with a pleasant voice. "Miss Benton, may I speak with you for a moment?" She nodded politely, following him aside. "Of course." He hesitated before speaking. "It's about Mrs. Keene." Liana's brows lifted slightly. "What about her?" "She's asked to speak with you before disembarking tomorrow. She said she owes you and your nephew an apology, in person." Liana paused, her expression unreadable. "I'll listen," she said. "But forgiveness takes more than words." The next morning, just before docking, the three of them met in the quiet lounge near the ship's exit. The sea beyond the windows was calm, gray and gold beneath the early light. Marjorie stood when they arrived, dressed simply, her posture humble, her eyes red-rimmed from sleeplessness. She looked nothing like the woman who had once commanded the boutique with such certainty. "Miss Benton," she began softly, "and Isaiah. Thank you for coming." Isaiah looked up at her, his face open but cautious. He said nothing. Marjorie took a slow breath. "I've spent my life believing I was fair, that I judged people only by how they acted. But that day showed me something ugly about myself. I didn't see a child, I saw a stereotype I was too afraid to question." Her voice wavered, but she continued. "I thought I was protecting my store. What I was really protecting was my prejudice." Liana said nothing, letting the silence speak for her. "I've joined the program you mentioned," Marjorie added quietly. "I start next month. I want to learn from the people I used to look past." Liana's gaze softened slightly. "That's a start." Marjorie nodded. "And if you'll allow it, I'd like to donate my severance pay to your art foundation." I think it belongs there more than in my bank account. Liana exhaled slowly, not with relief but with acceptance. Growth isn't comfortable, she said. But it's honest. I appreciate that you're trying. Marjorie's eyes filled again. Isaiah, I hope you can forgive me someday. Isaiah looked up at her. I already did. The room went still. The simplicity of his words seemed to carry more weight than any speech could. Marjorie nodded, covering her mouth to steady herself. When the meeting ended, Marjorie left quietly, not redeemed but changed. Isaiah watched her go, then turned to his aunt. You really think she'll keep her promise? Liana smiled softly. She will if she meant it. The world changes one person at a time. Sometimes you just have to give people the chance to be better. As they stepped off the ship, the sun broke fully across the water, lighting the path ahead of them. The wind brushed against their faces, gentle, new, forgiving. Every step they took away from that ship felt like walking into a different kind of peace. Isaiah held the bracelet Arturo had given him, its gold shining faintly in the light. He didn't need to say anything. The look on his face said it all. He understood now what it meant to rise above ignorance without losing kindness. The truth of that day would follow them, not as pain but as power. Because when dignity meets injustice and still stands tall, it teaches everyone watching what true strength looks like. If you've ever believed that quiet grace can change a loud world, leave a comment below. Like this story if you believe every child deserves respect, and subscribe if you know equality should never depend on appearance, privilege, or fear. Weeks later, the cruise felt like a distant memory. Life had returned to its rhythm, but the lessons it left behind were still alive in quiet, powerful ways. Liana Benton, a 39-year-old designer known for her poise and creativity, had returned to her studio, a space filled with sketches, tools, and sunlight. She worked in calm focus, her hands steady, her thoughts clear. Across the room, Isaiah sat at her work table, carefully stringing beads together, his tongue peeking out in concentration. You've gotten better, Liana said, smiling as she glanced up from her sketch pad. He grinned. I've been practicing. I want this bracelet to mean something. And what will it mean? She asked. He paused, thoughtful. That people can change if you give them a chance. Liana set her pencil down, letting that answer settle in her heart. That's a perfect message, she said. Because change isn't about forgetting, it's about growing. The studio phone rang and she answered it gently. A few moments later, her expression shifted from focus to quiet surprise. You did? That's wonderful, she said into the receiver. Yes, please tell her I'm proud of her for keeping her word. She hung up, still smiling. Isaiah looked up. Who was it? It was the director of the community art program, she said. Marjorie's been volunteering there every week since we got back. They said she's learning from the kids and they're learning from her. Isaiah blinked. She really did it. She did, Liana said softly. And that's what makes forgiveness worth it, when someone takes the lesson and carries it forward. The afternoon light drifted in golden and steady, falling across her workbench and the bracelet Isaiah was finishing. The gold links glowed softly, and Liana couldn't help but think of that day in the boutique, the tension, the humiliation, and the quiet victory that followed. That moment had changed more than one life. Arturo had since joined a new jewelry gallery, one that valued inclusion over image. He'd written to Liana, saying her courage had reminded him why he loved his craft in the first place. And Marjorie, once hardened by bias and pride, was now learning how to rebuild herself from the inside out. Her letter to Liana arrived a week later, written in graceful script. I used to think my position gave me power. Now I understand that power comes from respect. I can't undo the hurt I caused, but I can make sure I never repeat it. Thank you for giving me the mirror I needed to see myself clearly. Liana folded the letter carefully, placing it inside her sketchbook. Some stories don't end with punishment, they end with growth. Isaiah slid the bracelet across the table. For you, he said shyly. She picked it up, touched by the care he'd put into every link. You're learning fast, she said softly. He grinned. I had a good teacher. She smiled. You had a good heart. That's better than anything I could teach. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the kind of quiet that didn't need to be filled. It was the silence of peace, of healing, of two people who had lived through something unfair but had turned it into something beautiful. Later that evening, Liana took the bracelet and placed it beside one of her newest designs, a pendant in the shape of a small golden heart surrounded by open hands. She had named the piece Understanding. It would be part of her next collection, inspired not by luxury but by humanity. When she looked at it, she saw not jewelry but meaning. Every gem, every link, every glint of gold represented a lesson, that prejudice may try to divide, but grace can rebuild. Isaiah leaned against her arm, his voice quiet. Do you think people will ever stop judging? She sighed softly, resting a hand on his shoulder. Maybe not all at once. But if one person changes and then another, eventually, yes. The world gets better piece by piece. He nodded, his small hand finding hers. Then we just have to keep making pieces. Liana smiled at that, her eyes glistening. Exactly. Outside, the sky darkened to shades of deep blue and silver, and the first stars began to appear. The city beyond her studio windows pulsed with life, strangers passing each other, each with their own stories, their own silent battles. Somewhere out there, perhaps Marjorie was closing another class, thanking a child for teaching her patience she'd never had before. And somewhere inside the quiet heart of that moment, Isaiah and Liana continued to work, not just on jewelry but on hope itself. Because sometimes justice doesn't roar, it glows. Sometimes equality doesn't fight, it teaches. And sometimes the smallest act of grace leaves the deepest mark of change. If you believe compassion can transform even the coldest heart, leave your thoughts in the comments. Like this story if you stand for quiet strength over loud prejudice, and subscribe if you believe in a world where everyone deserves dignity, fairness, and a second chance.